Surprising news for the Minnesota Vikings today as they cut quarterback Jaren Hall. They drafted him out of the University of BYU. I don't even know if that makes any sense. Is the University of BYU a thing? I don't even know. They drafted him out of BYU in the 5th round, and he got a start last year versus the Atlanta Falcons because he had to start. The Minnesota Vikings lost Kirk Cousins. The situation wasn't looking bright for this situation at hand. Dobbs wasn't ready. They threw Jaren Hall into the mix. Mullins, I think, was hurt at the moment, so he couldn't start. In comes Jaren Hall for the Minnesota Vikings, and then he gets hurt, and then Josh Dobbs' sanity starts. But this wasn't a surprise to me. It was a surprise to me that he made the 53-man roster to begin with. I know a lot of people were high on Jaren Hall, especially after he played really well against the Philadelphia Eagles, threw for multiple touchdowns, had 0 interceptions. He did get an unfortunate injury at the end of his playing time in his last play to his leg, got like a contusion or something. And so maybe that contributed to this, but according to what Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah said today in their press conferences, they wanted more experience in the locker room. They wanted more quarterback experience. They did not want to go through a situation that happened last year where they were playing quarterback roulette. They were throwing different quarterbacks out there, every other play, every other game, because Kirk Cousins, who's been Mr. Consistent throughout his entire career, went down with an injury. So that's why they made this move. They did not want to play Jaren Hall, who isn't ready, isn't mature enough, doesn't have a great arm, doesn't make great decisions on the football field, and it's only his second year as a 5th-round pick out of BYU. Don't blame the guy. He wasn't asked to do this. So they signed Brett Rypien, who's been a quarterback, kind of bounced around a little bit, played for the Bears, played for the Denver Broncos, but he's familiar with the system that Kevin O'Connell coaches. He played for him for the Los Angeles Rams a while back. But this is what Kevin O'Connell said about Jaren Hall. And it's kind of garbage. He says, I fully believe in Jaren Hall's future. I'm sure he does. And Kevin Seifert went on to write, but swapping him out for Brett Rypien was better for the team in the short term. The move was really indicative, this is what Kevin O'Connell is speaking again, of knowing what we went through last year. Exactly. They went through a string of injuries in 2023 where, like I said, it was a different quarterback every game. Dobbs was lights out for 2 weeks, and then he fell off the face of the earth and couldn't make a simple completion down the field. And then Nick Mullins was in, and he was either throwing for 400 yards and 3 interceptions, and really that was all his stat line. Nick Mullins was a very entertaining quarterback because he was gunslinger to the mainstream. He just went out there and ripped the ball. But I keep on going back to this idea that the Minnesota Vikings needed Jaren Hall to begin with. Last year, the Minnesota Vikings needed to start him, and Minnesota Vikings fans wanted him to play. And people are predicting Jaren Hall to make the 53-man roster, and he's a lock to make the 53-man roster. I saw Purple Daily do a podcast about that, and on Score North, that is. And they do a great podcast. But my thought is the Minnesota Vikings, if they had to play Jaren Hall, something went wrong during the course of the season. And same thing with Brett Rypien. I mean, it's like, I don't really necessarily love this decision or hate this decision. I don't think this decision matters. If Sam Darnold gets hurt and Nick Mullins isn't playing well, the season is garbage to begin with. There are only a few select teams in the NFL that if they lose their starting quarterback, their backup quarterback could sort of try to tread water with the team. There's one guy that I think of that's going to be out for the entire season, Case Keenum. He already went on IR. That's a guy that's like, okay, If CJ Stroud goes down, maybe Case Keenum can find a hot streak and tread water with the team. It doesn't matter. A Brett Rypien, a Jaren Hall, a quarter QB3 on the roster. If these guys get in the game, the season's over. Doesn't matter. Yeah, the Minnesota Vikings waived Jaren Hall. I said that he should not make the 53-man roster. They signed Brett Rypien. Who gives a rip? It's not like Brett Rypien is going to change the landscape of the Minnesota Vikings season or change the trajectory, because if he gets in the game, something went historically wrong for the Minnesota Vikings this season. Sam Darnold got hurt. Nick Mullins didn't play well or got hurt. Insert Brett Rypien. Here we go. Now it's the time. It's ridiculous. Doesn't matter. So, this is something to talk about. The Minnesota Vikings shockingly waived Jaren Hall after performing really well in preseason games and, being the guy that they drafted. But the goal is to get him on the practice squad. They want to further develop him as a quarterback. More hot garbage from the Minnesota Vikings organization. But we'll see. Other interesting news is the New Orleans Saints claimed Kene Nwangwu, a surprise cut from the Minnesota Vikings. No one really expected that. They claimed him, and then they waived him because he showed up to their facility and had a failed physical. So Kene Nwangwu hits free agency, hits the waiver wire once again after the Minnesota Vikings didn't retain him. But the big news is Jaren Hall waived. Second-year quarterback out of the University of BYU, Brigham Young University. 5th-round pick. Minnesota Vikings cut ties and try to get him back on the practice squad.